Hi, folks. Let's move on for our video lesson 2 here related to spinal nerves. One vocabulary term and one structure you ought to know, um, or term for that structure, this term is RAMI. The word RAMI is like the same as the beginning of the word ramification. I don't know if you know that word, but the word ramification is about, well, the eventual results or the consequences of a course of action or a decision or something like that. So the same meaning is there with this term, RAMI. RAMI are branches of spinal nerves. RAMI is plural. The singular is ramus. So let me show you some diagrams here. I got to get my face out of here. But anyway, this is, of course, a spinal cord, and this is showing what's called a reflex arc. We'll talk more about reflex arcs in the next video. But what happens here is that sensory signals, of course, enter the posterior of the spinal cord. And if you have some type of painful stimulus and your body needs to move rapidly to get away from that situation that's causing that pain, there's going to be a signal back to some motor neurons, and it's going to cause you to move. So maybe you grab a hot pan and you pull your hand away before you even realize it registers in your brain that it's hot. That's a reflex. Well, if you look at how this works here, there are pathways where this set of nerves um, can cross over to the dorsal side or maybe the anterior side. And this word dorsal means posterior, and the word ventral here also means anterior. But there are branches off this sort of convergence point here. And so these branches are known as rami. So this is the dorsal ramus, this is the ventral ramus. And of course, the destination for these nerves, or the origin of these nerves, if it's sensory, is going to be to the dorsal side or the back side of the body, and these ventral ones are going to be toward the front side of the body. This is another look at it, and this shows you the body of the vertebrae. So this is an anterior view here. You've got the dorsal root back here, which is also known as posterior, and then the anterior, which is also known as ventral here, roots, and the little rootlets here. The pathways of that signaling converge. This is one of those ganglion. It's a collection of nerve cell bodies. And then there are branches off, right? These nerves, it's not just one nerve. They split off and they branch off into smaller and smaller nerves. So there are multiple destinations that these cells that are bundled together in these nerves are destined for. This is important to know. This is what's called the sympathetic trunk, and this is the ganglion of one of those trunks. And there's some communicating connections to some of the rami of the spinal nerves here too. But if you recall what sympathetic means, the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is the part of your nervous system that really activates your body in response to some very scary or exciting situation. So say a bear walks into the room and you need to run away very rapidly. Well, a whole bunch of physiological processes are going to happen, like your blood pressure is going to increase, your heart rate is going to increase, your rate of breathing is going to increase. And so your body needs to be told, sort of throughout your body, it needs to be told, hey, we got to run away from this bear. Well, this vertical trunk of neurons run along, or nerves, I should say, run along laterally your spinal cord and send excitatory signals to all those tissues that need to be getting ready to run away from that bear. So that's a pretty interesting little feature or structure that you ought to know about. Plexuses. Let's talk about plexuses. These are networks of nerves that are adjacent to the ventral rami. Okay, and there's 4 major plexuses. Go back to that screen. Cervical, brachial, lumbar, and sacral. So all of the plexuses except for this one are named for regions of the vertebral column, and it gives you an idea of where they are, of course. But the brachial one, of course, that refers to arms, so you can get an idea of where these plexuses are just based on their names. At least I hope so. Go back to that slide. This is all the plexuses that exist. The main ones, of course, are going to be cervical, brachial, lumbar, and sacral. But there is a celiac plexus. There's a coccygeal plexus. There's known as the Auerbach's plexus. And then, of course, the Meissner's plexus that are also, they've also been named and mapped. Let me show you some diagrams. This shows you where the cervical plexus is. And if we look at if you think about what a network means, it's it's a series of connections, right? A network is it's like a net. It's a work of fibers that are netted together. And if you actually look at the pathways of these ramifications or these rami of these nerves, they sort of connect again and disconnect and diverge again. Here's another one. This is the brachial plexus. That's going to be here. The lumbar plexus is down here. And then the sacral plexus is here. Notice how those pathways of the nerves sort of branch out and then they come back together and they form these beautiful networks of nerves. This is another look at the cervical plexus here. And one thing that I want you to see is that these pathways are basically mapped, and the end destination of these nerves, they're all named. These nerves here, hypoglossal nerve and accessory nerve, these are actually cranial nerves. These are nerves that are coming out of your brain, actually. We'll talk about that in the next chapter. But we've got some nerves here that are named. And, you know, being in a high school anatomy class, I'm not too concerned that you know the names of all these nerves. But what I do want you to know is that nerve networks have been mapped and they have been named. And so we kind of know where the destinations of these nerves are or where the origin of the sensory nerves are. And that's important for some diagnostic reasons. I want you to pay special attention to this too, C3, C4, and C5, okay? They branch off and then connect or communicate. C4 branches off and communicates with C5. Do you see that? And then this branches off. All of these branch off and eventually have a route where neurons that send action potentials through these nerves can eventually send signals through this special nerve that's called the phrenic nerve. Now, that's a really important nerve because it innervates your diaphragm. The diaphragm, of course, is that wall of muscle that's inferior to your lungs, that when your diaphragm pulls your lungs down, that's what allows you to breathe air in or pull air into your lungs. And for obvious reasons, breathing is really important. So another look at it here, too. This is another look at it. Same network, cervical plexus here, but it shows all these different branchings and reconnections and configurations of this cervical plexus. And of course, the phrenic nerve is named here as well. This is the beginning of the brachial plexus. This is C5, C6, C7, C8, and then T1, of course. If you look at these pathways, they reconverge, the rami reconverge and then rediverge. And one of the characteristic features that you're going to look for if you're ever trying to look for a brachial plexus is this M shape that's here, that M shape. That's one of those structures. And you know, these that you can identify if you're looking for the brachial plexus. And those nerves are named. Many of them are named for muscles that they're gonna head toward. All right, or maybe for the bones that those muscles are also named for. Oh, that thing keeps popping up. But if you look down there, if that thing goes away, you see how there's axillary and radial nerve and ulnar nerve, right? So those axillary is named for your armpit region, of course, and the radial nerve is named for the radius, and the ulnar nerve is named for the ulna. So you can track the destinations of these nerves or the origins of these nerves in many cases. This is another look at the brachial plexus and how they ultimately, what they're ultimately destined for. You can pause the video and look at this again if you want, but I don't want to make the video too long, so I'm going to move on here. Now, this is a dissected cadaver, and the brachial plexus has been found. What you're looking at here, this is the deltoid muscle. This is the neck of the specimen here. I think this is probably the sternocleidomastoid muscle. We got a couple of things here that are identified. And this is the brachial plexus, all right? You can see that M feature that's in here. It's kind of hard to identify, but it's there. And then, of course, the names of the nerves are given over here. So it's one of these beautiful networks of nerves that if you're privileged to take a gross anatomy class someday and you dissect out a human cadaver, this will probably be one of the structures that you're required to find. This diagram shows the destination of some of those nerves. If you were here the day that your ulnar nerve, which is sometimes referred to affectionately as your funny bone, was stimulated by that TENS machine, the transdermal trans-electrodermal stimulation, TENS, T-E-N-S, that thing that made your arm contract. The day we did that in class, you were stimulating this ulnar nerve right here in this what's called cubital tunnel. And that's where if you bang your elbow on something, you feel that twingy, like paralysis. It's all, ooh. Okay. So if you hit that nerve in your elbow, that's your funny bone, as it's called. This is that same diagram again. We're going to talk a little bit about the lumbar plexus and the sacral plexus. Oh, this is the thoracic nerves. The thoracic nerves, or the intercostal nerves, they have a relatively simple sort of pathway. Now, there's some branching, of course, in the lateral portions. You can see this is the sympathetic trunk here again. They run right along the ribs. They're a relatively simple pathway of nerves. That's those intercostal nerves. Intercostal literally means in between the ribs. Here's the lumbar plexus. Here's L1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, of course, and you can see how those nerves diverge and then reconnect and recommunicate. Really beautiful network of nerves. I'm going to show you some dissections here. So the lumbar plexuses have been identified here. I believe this is sort of the inferior end of the kidney that's been found. This is the abdominal aorta that bifurcates eventually into the femoral arteries. This is a cut intestine here, large intestine colon. So that's the beginning of the end, so to speak. So that would be the sigmoid colon, and down into that hole there would be the rectum. This, I believe, is a cut penis. This is sartorius muscle. We've got some of the iliotibial band here muscle and some of the quadriceps femoris muscles exposed. But if you do a careful dissection, some of the abdominal wall has been cut away here to reflect and find this. You can find some of those nerves that are part of or eventual destinations of that lumbar plexus. Here it is again. This is showing you in cartoonish style those networks of nerves, their names and where they are, and this is a dissected cadaver showing some of the corresponding nerves that are also seen over here. I like this diagram because it sort of shows you the ultimate destination of some of those nerves. And it's really important that we've mapped the final destination of these nerves because that helps with understanding of some the disease processes that can occur. Okay, so here is the sacral plexus, which includes spine nerves coming from L4, L5, and then through the sacrum. S5 is not included here. But what I want to point out about this sacral plexus is this huge nerve, which eventually is the destination of almost all these nerves, except for the S4, is this sciatic nerve. All right, and a lot of people get what's called sciatica, which is an impingement or inflammation of this sciatic nerve, and you feel the shooting pain or weakness or numbness down your leg. And generally, that's because this particular nerve or some of the rootlets that lead to the sciatic nerve have been impinged by some type of connective tissue or muscle inflammation that actually pinches these nerves and interferes with their action potential. Action potential. You can see here that this is the sacral plexus. This shows the S5 and the cossageal nerve here on this diagram. This is what it looks like in a dissected cadaver. So this is a posterior view of the gluteal region. This is the gluteus maximus, or a portion of it, so that it reveals these large nerves. And the sciatic nerve is huge. It might be about as big as your thumb or perhaps your ring finger in terms of diameter. It's a huge, huge nerve. And when you dissect out the gluteal region carefully, you can't miss it. Here it is again, showing this sciatic nerve. Notice how big it is, right? This is one of the dissection probes that we sometimes will use. And that's about the thickness of a pencil here, right? So if you look at the thickness of the sciatic nerve in comparison to that, it's a really big nerve. Okay, so that is it for plexuses and some of those spinal nerves. Thank you.